others, but doesn't really need to tax it. It can generate purchasing power through this other mechanism.
Right. We watched the Bush tax cuts, and you got this whole class of people that thought the tax cuts were great, while we watched the government just ask the Federal Reserve to create money constantly.
And what does this do? Taxation is the negative feedback loop in representative government.
Right.
If your representatives go out and they spend too much because they're trying to buy votes, and the only way that they can come up with the purchasing power to support that spending is through taxation. The taxation, of course, is going to come back and hit some people in the regular economy, and they're going to say, wait a minute, we don't want this. We're going to cut back on spending by throwing those people out of office. That's the negative feedback loop.
Right, where
so
people
as soon as you cut that off,
they can see this happening in their paychecks. They can see the
that's right, they can see it immediately.
Right.
So there's this immediate economic burden on them. They know where it came from. They say, we don't like it, and they can respond through the ballot box or God knows what, through revolution, I guess, in the long run, right? But they can respond because they know how this is affecting them directly. When it's done through this inflationary mechanism, the vast majority of people have no idea what's going on, and as a result, the negative feedback loop is essentially cut out of the system.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's another formula for disaster. Now you've taken another check and balance, another governing element out of the system, and the system will continue to speed up and speed up and speed up until it just shakes itself to pieces.
Mm-hmm.
That's true of an engine. Think of any mechanical device. As soon as you take out the control mechanisms of that kind, they tend to run to the point at which they self-destruct.
Right.
Well, politics has proven this again and again and again. These kinds of systems, I mean, in the old days it used to be debasement of the currency. They bring the current, call the coins back in, and instead of having a quarter of an ounce of gold, they put an eighth of an ounce of gold in it. And a lot of people didn't figure this out until it was much too late. They have a much more sophisticated method now, but it's the same idea. Debasement of the currency, debasement of the currency, debasement of the currency, transferring through this redistribution process more real wealth to the people who are doing the debasing. It collapsed Rome. It collapsed revolutionary France. It collapsed Weimar Germany. Collapsed a whole bunch of people during the 1930s. And it's collapsing us now. It has never worked.
Right.
And it never will. And in this particular instance, it's going to be the biggest collapse the world has ever seen, because the whole world, after the Bretton Woods Agreement, after World War II, the whole world came onto the Federal Reserve standard, I would call it. We actually did have a world currency, but it happened to be generated by one country. Federal Reserve note became the world reserve currency.
Right.
And once that goes down, what's the alternative going to be? Well, it'll be a long period of chaos, I think, before something new finally stabilizes international markets. And the consequence here is going to be disastrous, because the one thing that's propping up, or the main thing that's propping up the value of the Federal Reserve note in this country is the fact that all over the world it has still this world reserve currency use. When that stops, all of those bank deposits everywhere else in the world that are holding Federal Reserve notes because it was a Federal World Reserve currency, all those people will turn around and say, we don't need this anymore. And maybe we don't want it anymore. Maybe it's losing purchasing power too fast, and they will try to repatriate that to the United States. And when that huge influx of foreign purchasing power comes in here, what do you think the effect on inflation will be? Price increases. Be astronomical.
Sounds like we're in for a rough ride, no matter how you face it. Now, two outcomes of that rough ride can be people getting educated, understanding this very simple scam, or people falling into complete tyranny and saying, "Government, please just give us a working economy again. We'll believe anything you say." Is there really any other way, Dr. Vieira, other than really? It seems so simple yet so elusive, that we just teach our children these basic things at the youngest of ages. That this scam is as simple as being shortchanged at the cash register. If you are forced to use a certain currency, you're being ripped off. Don't accept it. Is that the answer? Is there a better answer? Is it really is the only way to do this to explain what seems like an elusive concept and simplify it at a young age?
Well, education is absolutely necessary, because if you don't have that, then obviously everyone's going to be led around with a ring in their nose, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's one of my major problems. This type of thing hasn't been taught, and it isn't taught. You go take a college economics course, and the first thing they're going to tell you is how wonderful the Federal Reserve is, or something like the Federal Reserve, central banking, right?
Yes.
They're going to tell you this is the greatest thing that ever happened.
You're joining the Keynesian cheerleader squad there.
That's right. So these are people who are either are entirely foreclosed from reality, or they have some hidden agenda, if you will. But education obviously is necessary. The other thing, of course, is to have a governor, the negative feedback loop, which is ultimately political. I mean, the people you have to control here ultimately are the law writers and the law enforcers. If we were following our Constitution correctly, we wouldn't have this problem. The reason we're not is because, I think, essentially greed has overtaken oath of office. Politicians saw that if they could find some way around these constitutional restrictions, it would advance their careers. Obviously, the bankers and their clients had a direct economic interest in this, and they formed a little partnership.
Right.
Little political partnership.
Yeah, so what I'm pointing out is obviously that's a win-win situation between the politicians and the bankers. Of course, the politicians get all the money they want for the programs they want to implement, and the bankers, of course, get to create lots of money and charge interest to the government and ultimately the people of that country. So that's a win-win situation. And as you said, we've seen this happen throughout time in Rome and over and over and over again. How does mankind evolve to the next step where we stop this from happening?
Well, I think at this stage we can forget doing something through Congress, at least in the short term. There just aren't enough people up there. I mean, I can't put Peter Schiff in the Senate and Ron Paul in the House, and that's not enough at this stage.
Right. It's a little step in the right direction, but it's going to be a long...
It's a step in the right direction. I'm wholly for it.
Right.
But it's not going to change things 2 years from now or 4 years from now.
Correct.
What we need to do is to come through the state governments. We have 50 of those. Some of them, potentially, we can get control of the state legislatures, and that's going to be enough. And we can put in a state government, through a state government, an alternative currency system within that state. Interestingly enough, this has already been decided by the Supreme Court. There are at least 2 cases directly on point that held that a state does not have to use the currency that Congress has authorized for the purpose of state governmental functions. And in fact, the particular case, famous one, the Lane County case, a taxpayer in Oregon was required by Oregon law to pay in gold and silver. And he said, no, I can pay in greenbacks. This is right after the Civil War. I can pay in these legal tender greenbacks because Congress has authorized these things for all debts, public and private. Goes to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court says, wrong. Congress can authorize that, but it can't override the governmental authority of the states. And if the states choose, in the exercise of their governmental authority, which a lot of which they still have, look at the 10th Amendment, for instance, to tax, or to spend, or to borrow, you can run down a list of these sovereign functions that they retain. If they choose to perform those functions with a currency other than what Congress has authorized, they have the constitutional authority to do so, and Congress can say nothing about it. Which means now that if a particular state wanted to adopt gold or silver coinage, or I've written a bill that involves electronic gold,
right,
even more technologically advanced. If a state wanted to do that, there is absolutely nothing that would prevent it from doing so. And once it starts that process, once you have the state taking in some of its revenue in terms of gold or silver and expending gold and silver to pay its bills, you're going to see that alternative currency move into the private economy, I think, fairly quickly, because now people will be aware that this stuff is available. They'll see the economic advantage of using it, and you'll have an honest